I have Elizabeth Shaw Dawson with me, and we're here to talk about ECOC and Chautauqua.
I'd like to introduce myself. I am the daughter of one of the original 13 Shaw children, and her name was Elizabeth Jean, Betsy, they called her, and I'm named after her. And I remember coming as a baby, a small child up here. I don't remember coming as a baby, but I would come as small children. My mom and dad would bring us, and we would work. We would painting. Well, of course, we weren't doing that. We were mostly running around making trouble. But eventually, as we got older, we would help with the painting and help with the work in June to open the Ministers Union up, which is what it was called then. We would have reunions here. I'm one of 59 first cousins, and as many of my aunts and uncles, and there were 13 originally, and one died when he was 4. But of the original 12 that remained, we would all have big reunions up here. Aunt Eunice would invite us all up. Of course, it would be kind of work parties, too. And anyway, it was a great time. I just remember running up and down the amphitheater, getting on stage, of course, because enjoyed being on stage. And then I started to come when my Aunt Helene ran the Ministers Union in the 80s and 90s. I started to come. She asked me to be a hostess. And the first year I came, I remember there was a serious crisis going on. There was a banana bandit apparently in the Shaw kitchen. And every night, bananas would be disappearing off tables. Well, this, of course, launched investigations, detective work. Who was the banana bandit? I think they found out at the end of the season it was some poor student who didn't have money to buy food. And if he'd only told us, we'd have chipped in anyway and bought him some. One of the next stories I remember, most of these stories are going to be about Helene, just don't tell her. So one, if you know John and Corky Fisher, John's a minister. They've been coming for years and years. Well, they took their honeymoon at Chautauqua, and they were over there. It was called the Annex Building, which is the Bird Warner Building, and in the apartment. Now, the apartment, let's just say it was not the Ritz, okay? It was on the bottom floor. It was kind of, anyway, it was, you stayed there if you had to stay there, if you know what I mean. So they were asleep at night. They had gotten in late, gone to sleep in the apartment at the Annex, and in the morning, all of a sudden, this woman comes through their door. The door slams open, the woman runs over, she kind of climbs across them on the bed to get to the fuse box, because apparently the fuses had blown, and she said, I'm just changing the fuses. So that was their honeymoon, which, of course, the image of Aunt Helene crawling across their bed to get to the fuse box is an image that will stay with them for some time. Now, I'd like to show another side of my Aunt Helene, because I've spent a lot of time with her. One time, I was hostessing, and it was in the 90s. I have another aunt, Aunt Sally, and she was here hostessing too. Okay, so it was my Aunt Sally, my Aunt Helene, and me were in the office in the Shaw Building, and a woman comes in, and she says, she's got her suitcase with her, she looks bedraggled, and she says, boy, I was just thrown out of the place I was in because there were fleas in my luggage, in my clothes. And, of course, I'm listening to this and thinking, no, Helene, no. And my Aunt Sally is thinking, no. And Helene goes, she's a Christian, God help us, and she goes, oh, you poor thing. You can stay here. And we went, and I'm thinking to myself, don't put her in my building, put her in the Annex, put her where Sally is. And Sally's thinking, don't put her in my building, put her over in the Shaw Building where Liz is. And so, anyway, so she ended up in the annex building. Oh, I was so happy about that. She ended up with her fleas in the annex building. And Aunt Sally comes over to me and she says, just don't you think fleas can't crawl across that bridge? Because back then there was a bridge that went between the two buildings. She says, fleas can crawl across there. Don't you worry, honey. So that was memorable stories. I remember there were other stories, people boiling thing. You know, the kitchen really is a hilarious place. There were people that would boil eggs, not pay attention. The eggs would blast out of the saucepan, hit people on the arm. You name it. The kitchens really are a place. I hope everybody enjoys their stays in the kitchens. So, thank you and good night.